For most of human history, growing old was not something the body was ever asked to do. This is not a dark thought. It is simply a quiet fact, one that sits at the edge of everything we assume about human life, about health, about the meaning of age. We live in a world that speaks of longevity as the natural goal of a human life, as the endpoint toward which medicine and nutrition and careful living are all pointed. We count our years, and we count them upward, hoping always for more. We speak of a long life as a good life, almost as though the two things are inseparable, almost as though they have always been the same. But they have not always been the same. For most of the time that human beings have walked this earth, a long life was not a common thing. It was not even an expected thing. The body was designed through millions of years of slow and patient evolution to do something very different from growing old gracefully. It was designed to live hard and fast and well for perhaps 3 or 4 decades, to reproduce, to raise young, to carry knowledge through a community, and then, often quite quickly, to stop. And that raises a quiet question. Not a frightening one. A slow, philosophical one. The kind of question that settles into the mind on a still night and stays there, turning gently. What does it mean that the body we live inside today was shaped for a life so different from the one we actually lead? What does it mean that the machinery of the human organism, the heart and the bones and the cells and the slow chemical conversations happening right now inside every one of us, was tuned for a world that no longer exists? To understand this question, we have to travel far back, not just hundreds of years, but hundreds of thousands of years. We have to let the familiar world dissolve and imagine slowly and carefully the conditions under which the human body actually took the shape it now has. We begin with a number that most people find startling the first time they hear it. For the vast majority of human prehistory, the average human lifespan was somewhere between 30 and 40 years. Some estimates place it lower. In Paleolithic populations, researchers studying skeletal remains and isotopic data suggest that reaching the age of 50 was genuinely unusual. Reaching 60 was remarkable. The age of 70, the age we now associate with retirement and reflection, and the long, comfortable tale of a well-managed life, was for most of human history something very few people ever saw from the inside. Now it is important to be careful here, because this number, the average lifespan of 35 or 40 years, is often misunderstood. When people hear it for the first time, they sometimes imagine a world in which everyone died young, in which middle age simply did not exist, in which the world was populated only by the very young. But that is not quite right. The low average lifespan of ancient humans was pulled down significantly by one enormous factor: infant and childhood mortality. Children died in enormous numbers in the ancient world. They died of infections, of accidents, of predation, of cold, of drought, of the thousand small and large disasters that a fragile young body could not survive in an unforgiving environment. When you include all of those early deaths in the calculation, the average age at death drops dramatically. But if you look at the people who did survive childhood, if you look at the adults who made it past the dangerous early years and entered the full functioning power of an adult human body, you find a somewhat different picture. Some of them did live into their 50s and even 60s. Some skeletal records suggest individuals who were almost certainly older than 60. And yet even among these survivors the pattern is clear. Deep old age, the kind of old age we now associate with the 70s, 80s and 90s, was extremely rare. The body, even when it made it past childhood, was not built to go that far. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes a certain quiet and profound sense. Evolution is not a designer in any intentional way. It does not plan. It does not set goals. It simply selects over and over and over again across thousands and thousands of generations for whatever works well enough to produce surviving offspring. And surviving offspring in the logic of evolution is the only thing that matters. Not comfort in old age, not wisdom in the final years, not the long, slow pleasure of watching grandchildren grow. What matters, in the ruthless arithmetic of natural selection, is whether you live long enough to reproduce, and whether your offspring live long enough to reproduce in turn. This means that the human body was shaped primarily for the years before and during reproduction. Everything the body does brilliantly, everything it does with ease and grace and efficiency and youth, reflects millions of years of pressure to make those early decades as effective as possible. The immune system in a young body is extraordinary. The bones in a young body are dense and resilient. The cells in the young body replicate cleanly and quickly. The muscles of a young body respond to stress and recover from injury with an efficiency that the same muscles in the body will not show 20 years later. All of this is not accidental. All of this is the accumulated wisdom of millions of years of a very simple instruction. Be excellent at living until you have reproduced, and then, as far as evolution is concerned, you have done your job. If we look deeper into what this means for the aging process, we find something that is both obvious and quietly astonishing. The deterioration we associate with aging, the slow loss of bone density, the thickening of arterial walls, the declining efficiency of the immune system, the increasing likelihood of cancer, the gradual loss of cellular repair capacity, none of this is a design flaw. None of it is a mistake. It is the result of something called antagonistic pleiotropy, a concept that sounds technical, but is in fact quite simple and quite beautiful in its terrible logic. Some genes that promote health and strength and reproduction in early life also contribute to decline in later life. The body, tuned by evolution to be brilliant at 20 and 30, was never optimized for what happens at 60 and 70 and 80. Because for most of human history, those ages were simply not a significant part of the selective landscape. They existed too rarely, they lasted too briefly, to exert much evolutionary pressure. In early human environments, the idea of the body as something that should still be working well at 70 would have been almost meaningless. Not cruel, not sad, simply irrelevant. The world did not ask the body to still be working well at 70. The world asked the body to hunt, to forage, to carry children, to move across difficult terrain, to fight off infection, to survive drought and predation, and the 1,000 ordinary disasters of a life lived close to the natural world. And for those purposes, for those specific, concrete, daily purposes, the body that evolution produced was genuinely excellent. It was strong and fast and adaptable, and surprisingly durable within the range of years it was actually designed for. This raises an important question that anthropologists and evolutionary biologists have spent many decades exploring. If the body was designed primarily for a life of perhaps 30 or 40 years, what does that mean for how we understand ancient human societies? What did community look like when old age was rare? Who held knowledge? Who guided the young? What happened to a person who somehow, through luck or strength or the particular grace of their immune system, managed to outlive the design? The answers to these questions are genuinely surprising, and they force us to revise many of the stories we tell ourselves about ancient life. We often imagine hunter-gatherer societies as harsh and brief, as places where life was, in the famous phrase, nasty, brutish, and short. But the evidence from modern anthropological studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer groups like the Kung San of the Kalahari, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Agta of the Philippines, suggests a more nuanced and in some ways more interesting picture. And these societies are not simply collections of young people struggling desperately to stay alive. They have complexity, social structure, systems of knowledge transmission, networks of obligation and care. And they have, crucially, some older individuals, not many. Not the vast grey armies of elderly that populate the developed world today, but some. Enough to suggest that the complete absence of the old was never quite the norm. What the anthropological record suggests is that in a functioning hunter-gatherer group, an individual who survived into their 40s or 50s occupied a specific and valued role. They carried knowledge. They remembered the locations of water sources during drought years. They knew which plants could be eaten in times of scarcity, which animal behaviours predicted certain weather patterns, which social conflicts had arisen before and how they had been resolved. This kind of knowledge, accumulated, practical, deeply specific to the local environment, was enormously valuable. It could mean the difference between the group surviving a difficult season and the group not surviving. There is a concept in evolutionary anthropology called the grandmother hypothesis, first developed in a compelling form by the anthropologist Kristen Hawkes in the 1990s. The grandmother hypothesis proposes that the relatively extended post-reproductive lifespan of human females, a phenomenon unusual among mammals since most female mammals remain fertile until close to death, evolved because grandmothers who helped provision and care for their grandchildren significantly increased the survival of those grandchildren. A grandmother who could gather food and share it with weaned grandchildren allowed their mothers to have subsequent children sooner, increasing the reproductive rate of the group. In this view, the extended lifespan of human females beyond menopause was not an accident or a flaw, but an adaptation, a specific evolutionary solution to a specific problem. This is a beautiful and important idea, and it suggests something profound, that even within the logic of a body designed primarily for youth and reproduction, there was selective pressure for some degree of longevity in certain individuals playing certain roles. Not a long old age for everyone, not the universal extended lifespan we now pursue, but enough longevity in enough key individuals to carry certain kinds of knowledge and provide certain kinds of care. From an evolutionary perspective, this is the edge of what the body was designed for. Not the 90s, not even necessarily the 70s, but perhaps in some specific circumstances and for some specific roles, the 60s. The outer limit, carved not by accident, but by the very precise pressures of survival in small mobile groups, living in close relationship with their local environments. If we look at the archaeological evidence, the bones and the teeth and the isotopic records that physical anthropologists spend their careers studying, we find a picture that is consistent with this. The remains of ancient humans show patterns of wear and stress that are very different from the patterns we see today. The bones of adults who died in their 30s and 40s show evidence of enormous physical activity. They show healed fractures and joint stress, and the kind of wear that comes from a life constant movement, carrying, digging, climbing. They show the records of a body that was used, and used hard, throughout its entire active span. They also show, in many cases, evidence of significant illness and injury. Ancient humans dealt with parasites. They dealt with infections. They dealt with the physical consequences of a diet that varied enormously with the seasons, with years of abundance and years of scarcity. The teeth of ancient adults show evidence of periods of nutritional stress, narrow lines in the enamel called hyperplastic lines, formed when growth paused during illness or starvation. The bones show evidence of healed injuries that today would require surgery and rehabilitation, injuries that in the ancient world simply had to be survived as best they could, leaving lasting marks on the skeleton. And yet the bones also show something striking. For most of their short lives, the ancient humans whose remains we study appear to have been genuinely strong. The cortical bone, the dense outer layer of the major bones of the body, is often strikingly thick in ancient remains compared to modern humans. This reflects a lifetime of load-bearing activity, a body that was asked every day to do physical work and that responded by building itself stronger. The muscles attached to these bones, gone now of course, were almost certainly remarkable by modern standards. The ancient human body, living the life it was designed for, was a formidable physical instrument. This is one of the quiet paradoxes at the heart of thinking about human longevity. The bodies that lived the shortest lives, by our modern measure, were in some respects the most physically capable bodies. Not in every way. They were riddled with parasites and vulnerable to infections that modern medicine handles easily, and they lived with pain and injury that today would be treated and managed. But in their core physical capability, in the raw strength and endurance and mobility of their daily function, the ancient adult human body in its prime was often extraordinarily impressive. It was a body built to its purpose, used at its design limit, and then, relatively quickly, done. To understand why the body is designed the way it is, we need to think about what it was actually optimized for. Not the quiet comfort of a 70-year-old in a warm house. Not the gradual accumulation of decades and decades of experience. It was optimized for a very specific set of problems, and those problems all had to be solved within a relatively narrow window of time. Consider reproduction. The human body begins preparing for reproduction in early adolescence, typically somewhere between 10 and 14 years of age, depending on nutrition and environment. By the late teens and early 20s, the reproductive system is at peak function. The hormonal environment of the young adult human body is tuned for reproduction. Testosterone and estrogen at high levels, the immune system and the inflammatory response calibrated to balance the competing demands of fighting infection and maintaining fertility. The metabolic rate high enough to support both the enormous energy demands of physical activity and the considerable energy costs of pregnancy and lactation, or of supporting a reproductive partner. All of this is expensive. The body pays a cost for this extraordinary performance in youth. And that cost, in the logic of evolutionary biology, is paid later. The same hormonal environments that support peak reproductive function in youth contribute to the long-term processes of cellular aging. The same inflammatory responses that protect against infection and support healing in young bodies become, over decades, contributors to the chronic inflammatory conditions that characterize aging. Atherosclerosis, arthritis, the slow scarring of tissues that reduces their function. The very machinery that made the young body brilliant begins, in later decades, to work against it. This is not a flaw. It bears repeating. This is not a flaw. From the perspective of evolution, it does not matter what happens after the reproductive years are complete. What matters is that those reproductive years are maximally productive, and so the body trades long-term durability for short-term excellence, and it does so not by accident but by design, by the slow, patient, mindless design of natural selection, but design nonetheless. In early human environments, this trade was essentially invisible. The body traded something it never needed to use. Extraordinary cellular maintenance capacity in the 7th and 8th decades of life for something it needed desperately. Reproductive excellence in the 2nd and 3rd decades of life. The trade made perfect sense because there was almost no environment in the Paleolithic world that would actually ask the body to cash in the long-term side of the bargain. Very few people lived long enough for the cost of that trade to become apparent. And then everything changed. The change came slowly, as large changes in human life tend to. It began perhaps 12,000 years ago, in a period that historians call the Neolithic Revolution, and that anthropologists sometimes describe as one of the most consequential transitions in the entire history of the human species. This was the moment, or more accurately, the long, slow process, during which certain human populations began to shift from mobile hunter-gatherer lifestyles to settled agricultural ones. They began to farm, they began to keep animals, they began to build permanent or semi-permanent structures and to stay in one place across seasons and years. The effects of this transition on human lifespan are complex and in some ways counterintuitive. In the short term, the shift to agriculture was in many respects bad for human health. The skeletal evidence is clear on this point. Populations that made the transition to agriculture show signs of increased nutritional deficiency compared to hunter-gatherer populations. Their bones are less dense, their teeth show more decay and more evidence of nutritional stress. They were shorter. They appear to have been more susceptible to infectious disease, in part because settled agricultural communities living in close proximity to domesticated animals created ideal conditions for the transmission of pathogens, the same conditions that gave rise to smallpox, influenza, measles, and many of the other infectious diseases that have killed enormous numbers of human beings throughout recorded history. But agriculture also created something that hunter-gatherer life could not easily sustain: surplus. The ability to store food, to accumulate more calories than were needed for immediate consumption, changed the conditions of human life in a profound way. It meant that more children could survive. It meant that populations could grow. It meant that specialization was possible, that not every person in a community needed to be engaged in food procurement every day, that some people could be potters or weavers or priests or soldiers or scribes. And it meant, over very long timescales, that the institutions of medicine and knowledge and technology could begin to develop. The agricultural revolution did not immediately extend human lifespan in any dramatic way. For many centuries, and indeed millennia, the average human lifespan in agricultural societies was not dramatically different from what it had been in hunter-gatherer societies, and in some respects it was shorter. But it set in motion a process whose endpoint is the world we live in today, a world in which the average human being in a developed country can expect to live into their late 70s or early 80s, in which people routinely reach their 90s, in which the fastest growing demographic in many countries is people over the age of 100. This is astonishing, not just in historical terms, but in biological terms. The human body, shaped by millions of years of evolution for a life of perhaps 30 or 40 years, is now being asked to function for 80 or 90 years. And it does so mostly imperfectly, often painfully, with a great deal of help from medicine and technology and the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 years of civilization. But it does so, and this raises the quiet, philosophical question that sits at the heart of everything we're exploring here tonight. What does this mean to live in a body that was designed for a world that no longer exists? This question is not simply academic. It has real and daily consequences for almost every aspect of how the modern human body works. Consider the immune system. In a young body, the immune system is extraordinarily effective. It is aggressive, responsive, and powerful. It eliminates threats quickly and efficiently. But the same aggression that makes the young immune system so effective also means that over decades, the immune system begins to contribute to the chronic inflammation that underlies much of what we experience as aging: arthritis, atherosclerosis, the progressive scarring of the lungs and liver and kidneys that comes with decades of normal use. The immune system, designed to protect a body for perhaps 40 years, does not scale gracefully to 80. Consider the cardiovascular system. The human heart is an extraordinary organ. It beats approximately 100,000 times per day, approximately 40 million times per year, and over a lifetime of 80 years, approximately 3 billion times in total. It does this without rest, without maintenance shutdowns, with nothing but the continuous circulation of blood to keep its cells alive and functioning. In a young body, the arteries that carry blood away from the heart are supple and elastic. They expand and contract with each heartbeat with ease. But over decades, those arteries gradually stiff. Calcium deposits accumulate in their walls. The inner lining, the endothelium, accumulates small areas of damage and repair. The result is atherosclerosis, the progressive narrowing and hardening of the arteries that is the underlying cause of most heart attacks and strokes. This process begins early, in the second and third decades of life, but it takes many decades to reach the point of causing clinical disease. In a body designed to last 40 years, it would never get that far. In a body being asked to last 80 years, it becomes one of the leading causes of death. If we look deeper into the biology of aging, we find a concept called the hallmarks of aging, a framework developed by researchers studying the fundamental processes by which cells and tissues decline over time. These hallmarks include things like genomic instability, the accumulation of damage to DNA over time, as the repair mechanisms that copy and protect our genetic material make small errors that gradually accumulate. They include the shortening of telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of chromosomes that shorten each time a cell divides, until eventually cells reach a state called senescence, where they can no longer divide and begin to produce inflammatory signals that damage surrounding tissue. They include the loss of proteostasis, the declining ability of cells to maintain the quality of their proteins, to fold them correctly, and to eliminate those that are misfolded, a declining capacity that contributes to the neurodegenerative diseases of aging like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Every one of these processes is a consequence of the same fundamental biological reality. The human body was not designed to keep its cellular maintenance machinery running at full capacity for 8 or 9 decades. The maintenance machinery was designed to run at full capacity for perhaps 3 or 4 decades, and then it was allowed, by the indifferent logic of evolution, to begin to decline. because in the world for which the body was designed, 3 or 4 decades was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in fact, a full human life. From an evolutionary perspective, there is something almost poignant about the modern human condition. We have, through the extraordinary achievements of medicine and public health and technology and civilization, dramatically extended the period during which human beings are alive. We have outrun the design specifications of our own bodies. We are living in the extra innings, in the chapters of the story that evolution never bothered to write, asking our ancient biological machinery to keep doing something it were never asked to do for this long, and watching with a mixture of gratitude and grief as it struggles more and more noticeably to comply. This is not a counsel of despair. It is simply an invitation to see the body with new eyes, to understand why it ages the way it ages. To understand why the diseases that kill most people in the developed world today, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, the slow failures of kidneys and lungs and joints, are concentrated in the later decades of life. Not because those decades are somehow inherently tragic or inherently diseased, but because those decades are the territory for which the body was given the least preparation, the least evolutionary investment, the least careful design. In early human environments, this would not have been a problem that anyone needed to solve. It would not even have been a problem that anyone recognized. The ancient hunter-gatherer who died at 42 of an infected wound, or at 38 of a complicated childbirth, or at 45 during a particularly brutal winter, did not experience the slow erosion of cellular function that kills most people in the modern world. They were, in the most literal sense, spared the consequences for biological design that never imagined they would live so long. This raises an important question about what it means to age well in a modern world, a question that medicine and biology and philosophy have all been wrestling with intensely over the past several decades. If the body was not designed for old age, can we redesign it? Can we intervene in the basic mechanisms of cellular aging and extend not just lifespan but health span, the period during which the body is genuinely functional and vital and capable? The answer that modern biology is beginning to suggest is, perhaps, not easily, not quickly, and not in the dramatic science fiction way that popular accounts sometimes suggest. But the research on aging has accelerated enormously in the past 2 decades, and the picture that is emerging is of a set of biological processes that are, in principle, modifiable. The telomere shortening that limits cellular replication is controlled by specific enzymes that could, in principle, be influenced. The senescent cells that accumulate in aging tissues and produce inflammatory signals can, in animal studies at least, be selectively eliminated with notable improvements in tissue function. The accumulated damage to mitochondria, the small organelles inside cells that produce energy, that contributes to the declining metabolic efficiency of aging tissues, may be reversible, at least partly. But all of this is biology, and biology is not the only lens through which to look at the question of human longevity. There is also the philosophical lens, the anthropological lens, the deeply human question of what a life means and what it means to live well within whatever span the body actually provides. For most of human history, the question of how long to live was not a question anyone was in a position to ask. Life lasted as long as it lasted, and the task was to live it fully within that span, whatever the span turned out to be. The hunter-gatherer did not plan a retirement. They did not think about legacy in the abstract sense we now use the word. They thought about the day and the season and the survival of the group and the knowledge that needed to be passed to the young, and the relationships that held the community together. These were not small things. They were, in many respects, everything. There is something worth sitting with in this. The ancient human body, designed for perhaps 40 years, lived those 40 years with an intensity of engagement with the physical world that is difficult for modern people to imagine. Every sense was in use every day. The body was asked to do what it was designed to do, to move, to forage, to build, to carry, to respond to weather and terrain and the behavior of animals and the condition of plants. The 40-year-old who had lived this way had lived fully inside their biological design. They had used their body as it was intended to be used, and the wear on their bones and the calluses on their hands and the depth of their hard-won knowledge were all evidence of a life genuinely lived. We have traded that for something else, something longer, and in many respects more comfortable, and in some respects more uncertain. The modern human lives in a body designed for 40 years and asks it to last 80. We fill those extra decades with things the ancient body never knew. The soft chair and the warm room and the quiet evening. The gradual accumulation of a kind of comfort that our ancestors would have found incomprehensible. We take pills and undergo procedures and eat carefully and exercise deliberately to keep a body running that was never meant to run this long. And mostly it works for a while and then it doesn't, and we find ourselves in the strange territory of deep old age, which is a territory that almost no human being in the entire history of our species was ever required to navigate before. This is not necessarily a tragedy. It may be in fact one of the most remarkable things that our species has ever accomplished. To extend the human lifespan so dramatically, so quickly, in the span of just a few thousand years, and especially in the last few hundred years, this is extraordinary. It is a testament to the cumulative power of human knowledge and human cooperation, and the slow, patient work of understanding how the body works and how it can be supported. But it is worth knowing what we are doing. It is worth understanding that the extended lifespan we now take for granted in the developed world is not the natural state of the human body. It is not what evolution intended. It is not what the body was designed for. It is an achievement, a cultural and technological and medical achievement built on top of a biological foundation that was laid down in a very different world. And there is something in that knowledge that is both sobering and strangely freeing. To know that the body is doing something extraordinary simply by lasting as long as it does is to see it differently. The ache in the joints at 60 is not a failure. It is the sound of a body trying to do something it was never designed to do, trying with genuine effort and considerable success to extend past its original specifications. The fatigue at 70 is not a betrayal. It is the accumulated cost of a biological trade that made the 20s and 30s so vital and strong. The forgetting at 80 is not a simple loss. It is the slow consequence of a brain that was built with extraordinary precision for a much shorter life. If we look at the ancient humans who occasionally survived into their 50s and 60s, those rare individuals who somehow made it past the design limit, we find something interesting. The anthropological and historical evidence suggests that these individuals were often treated with particular respect. Not universally, not in every society, and certainly not in the romanticized way that modern people sometimes imagine. But in many hunter-gatherer societies, the person who had survived longer than almost anyone else around them was understood to carry something valuable, time itself, in the form of accumulated experience and memory. The elder was the archive of the group. The person who remembers the drought of 40 years ago was the person who knew it was possible to survive a drought of 40 years again. This is a different kind of value from what we tend to assign to older people in the modern world. In modern societies, older people are often valued for their personal accumulations, their savings, their property, the professional achievements of their careers. But in the ancient world, the value of an elder was almost entirely social and ecological. It was the knowledge they carried that was useful to the group's survival, and the relationships they have built and maintained over decades that held the community together. There's something worth thinking about in this. In a world where longevity was rare, it was treated as meaningful precisely because it was rare. The person who had lived past 40 in a world where most people died before 40 has done something remarkable, and they knew it, and the people around them knew it. There was no assumption that long life was ordinary, or expected, or the default. There was instead a recognition that every additional year was a gift from a universe that was generally not in the business of giving gifts. We've lost this recognition in the modern world somewhat. We have extended life so dramatically that we've begun to treat it as a birthright, as something that should happen automatically, as something that the failure of medicine represents a tragedy rather than the success of medicine represents an extraordinary gift. And perhaps this is part of what makes the final years difficult for many modern people, not just the physical difficulty of aging in a body not designed for it, but the psychological difficulty of aging in a world that has forgotten that aging to 80 or 90 is not normal in any deep evolutionary sense. It is miraculous. From an evolutionary perspective, we're all living in miracle territory after the age of 50. Not because we're doing anything wrong, not because the body is failing when it ages, but because the body was designed for a world that is gone, and it is doing the best it can, and the best it can is often genuinely extraordinary. Consider what the body accomplishes in its extended years. The brain, which begins to show measurable changes in memory and processing speed in the 40s, also continues to accumulate something that neuroscientists call crystallized intelligence. The kind of deep pattern recognition and associative reasoning that comes from decades of experience. The older brain is, in some respects, genuinely wiser than the younger brain, not better at all tasks, not faster or more flexible, but better at the tasks that require the kind of knowledge that only time can build, understanding complex social situations, recognizing long-term patterns, navigating the ambiguities of experience that cannot be resolved by logic alone. This is not simply sentiment, it is measurable. The brain regions associated with crystallized intelligence, the areas involved in language, long-term memory, semantic knowledge, continue to function well, and sometimes even improve into the 60s and 70s in many people. The decline of aging is real, but it is not uniform, and the specific capacities that come with experience are genuinely valuable in ways that the young brain, for all its speed and flexibility, cannot easily replicate. In early human environments, this would have been the whole point of the older individual, not their physical strength. That was declining. Not their speed, or their acute vision, or their ability to run down prey. Those were fading. but their accumulated knowledge, their pattern recognition, their memory of what the world had looked like across decades, their understanding of the social dynamics of the group and the long histories of its relationships. This was what made the old person valuable, when they existed at all. There's kind of species-level wisdom in this that is worth pausing to appreciate. Evolution, working through the grandmother hypothesis and through the selection of individuals who could transmit important knowledge across generations, arrived at a design for human aging that is not simply a deterioration, it is a transformation. The body moves from physical excellence to social and intellectual value. The runner becomes the storyteller. The hunter becomes the keeper of maps, of histories, of the knowledge of ways go when the familiar routes have failed. This transition is not painless. The body does not give up its physical excellence willingly. Every joint that stiffens, every muscle that weakens, every morning that requires more effort to begin than the morning of 30 years ago, all of this is real, and it hurts, and it is a loss that every aging person knows intimately. But it is a designed loss, if we can use that phrase loosely. It is the cost of a trade that the body made millions of years ago and cannot unmake. What has changed in the modern world is the nature of what lies on the other side of that trade. In the ancient world, the older person's wisdom and knowledge were genuinely essential for survival. The community depended on them. Their presence was not optional. But in the modern world, the knowledge that older people carry is often not essential in the same immediate way. The information they've accumulated over decades is available in books and databases or websites. The patterns they have learned to recognize can be, in principle, computed by algorithms. The social history they carry can be partially reconstructed from records, and so the trade, physical decline in exchange for irreplaceable knowledge, has lost some of its urgency, even as the physical decline itself has remained. This is one of the quieter difficulties of aging in the modern world. Not just the physical difficulty, but the social and philosophical difficulty of a transformation that was once essential and is now, in many contexts, optional. The ancient elder was necessary. The modern elder is valued but not always necessary in the same immediate survival-oriented way. And this shift in the social meaning of aging, from essential to optional, is one of the things that makes the extended lifespan of the modern world a more complex gift than it might at first appear. For most of human history, the question of what to do with the later years of life did not need to be asked, because the later years of life barely existed. They were glimpsed rarely by the few individuals who managed to outlive the design limit. And for those individuals, the question of what to do with their extra time was answered by the community around them. Keep the knowledge, tell the stories, help care for the young. Remember the droughts and the migrations and the long cycles of the natural world that the young could not yet know. We have inherited this body, this ancient and imperfectly adapted body, and we're trying to figure out what to do with it in a world its designers never imagined. We're trying to find meaning in the long tail of life that evolution never prepared us for, asking the brain and the bones and the heart to keep working long past their original specifications, and doing so in an environment so different from the one that shaped them that the mismatch is sometimes staggering. The world of the ancient human was characterized by constant physical movement, by exposure to a wide variety of natural environments, by a diet that varied with the seasons and the luck of the hunt and the harvest, by social connections so dense and so constant that solitude was almost unknown. by sleep that followed the natural rhythms of light and darkness without the interference of artificial illumination, by the absence of the chronic low-level psychological stressors, financial anxiety, social comparison, the perpetual noise of information that characterize modern life. The body was designed for that world. It was shaped by that world. Its immune system was calibrated by exposure to the microbes of that world. Its sleep rhythms were set by the darkness of that world. Its metabolic expectations were formed by the feast and famine cycles of that world. Its social needs were shaped by the dense, continuous face-to-face human contact of that world. And we live in a different world, a world of chairs and screens and processed food and artificial light and unprecedented solitude and unprecedented noise. A world in which the body's ancient systems are continually being asked to respond to conditions they were never designed for, and doing so mostly imperfectly, with a kind of resilience that is itself a testament to the extraordinary flexibility of the human organism. This is the paradox we live inside every day. The body that carries us through modern life is an ancient body, not metaphorically ancient, literally ancient, shaped by millions of years of selection for conditions that no longer exist, carrying systems and tendencies and vulnerabilities that made perfect sense in a world of grasslands and forests and small nomadic groups and 40-year lifespans, and that now coexist somewhat awkwardly with the world of offices and supermarkets and retirement funds and medical technology that can keep the heart beating, long past the point where it wanted to stop. If we look at what the body still does brilliantly, even in the extended lifespan, we find the echoes of its original design. The immune system of a 40-year-old is still extraordinary by any absolute measure. The cardiovascular system of a 50-year-old who has been reasonably active is still capable of feats of endurance that would have been deeply impressive in any ancestral environment. The human brain at 60, with its accumulated decades of experience and patterns recognition, is capable of kinds of understanding and judgment that the 20-year-old brain, for all its speed and flexibility, cannot match. The body has not simply failed in its extended years. It has adapted imperfectly but genuinely to conditions it never expected to face. There is something in this that is worth sitting with quietly, in the way that only the very late hours of the night make possible. The body you live in is ancient, not just old, ancient. It carries within it the traces of millions of years of human and pre-human existence, the accumulated adaptations of ancestors who lived in grasslands and forests and caves and small temporary camps, who ate what they could find and slept when the darkness came and woke when the light returned and died, usually before they had any chance to wonder about the meaning of old age. Those ancestors are present in you in the most literal biological sense. Their adaptations are your adaptations. Their immune cells are your immune cells. Their sleep rhythms are your sleep rhythms. Their need for social connection, for physical movement, for the sensory richness of the natural world, these are your needs too. And when those needs go unmet, in the way that modern life often fails to meet them, the body remembers, at some deep cellular level, what it was designed for. This is not an argument against modernity. It is not a suggestion that we should try to return to the conditions of the Paleolithic. It is simply an invitation to understand the body more honestly, to see it not as a piece of technology that should last forever with proper maintenance, but as a biological artifact shaped for a specific and very different world. doing its best in a world it was never designed for, occasionally failing in the ways that biology predicts it should fail, and occasionally surprising us with the grace and resilience and depth of adaptation that 100,000 generations of survival have built into it. The fact that you are alive at all is an improbable gift. The fact that you are old enough to wonder about aging, if you are, is even more improbable from the perspective of the deep history of our species. For most of the time that human beings have existed on this earth, the luxury of wondering about old age was not widely available. It was the luxury of the rare, the lucky, the few who outlived their design specifications and found themselves in territory that no one had fully mapped. We're all in that territory now, those of us who live in the modern world with access to clean water and medical care and enough food. We are all living past the design limit, making our way through decades of life that evolution never had to optimize for, asking our ancient bodies to keep working in a world their designers never imagined. And they do, imperfectly, sometimes painfully, often surprisingly well they do. The heart keeps beating, the lungs keep breathing, the brain keeps thinking and remembering and making meaning. The hands keep reaching for the things that matter. The ancient, imperfectly adapted, extraordinary human body keeps going into territory it was never designed to reach, carrying all the accumulated weight of hundreds of thousands of years of survival, trying to be adequate to a life that is longer and stranger and more complex than anything its long history of evolution ever had to prepare it for. In early human environments, a person who had lived 40 years had done something remarkable. They had navigated the full span of a human life as evolution understood it. They had reproduced, most likely, and raised young, and contributed their knowledge and their labour and their social bonds to the survival of their group. They had used their body for its intended purpose, and used it well. They were complete in a sense that is difficult for us to understand, because we have extended the definition of completeness so far beyond what biology ever imagined. But here, in this quiet late hour, there is something worth taking from the ancient understanding. Whatever span of life you inhabit, you are living inside a body that was made for intensity and engagement, for the full use of its senses and its strength, and its social instincts, for the deep satisfaction of doing what it was designed to do. The ancient human, who lived 40 brilliant years and then was done, was not a diminished version of a modern human who lives 80 quiet years. They were a different kind of thing, a creature fully suited to its world, living at the edge of its biological capabilities, doing what a human being was designed to do. We cannot go back to that, and most of us would not choose to, given the choice. The extended lifespan we've achieved is precious. The decades of experience and reflection and deepening understanding that are only available to those who live long enough are genuinely valuable in ways that the ancient world could only occasionally afford to discover. But perhaps there is something in understanding what we are, these ancient creatures in a modern world, these Paleolithic bodies in climate-controlled rooms, that helps us live more gently inside the bodies we have, helps us understand why they ache when they're asked to sit still for too long, why they sleep poorly when the screens stay lit past midnight, why they feel most alive when they move through open air and change and physical engagement with the world, why the social connections that feel most nourishing are the face-to-face ones, the ones that involve physical presence and shared experience, and the ancient, irreplaceable knowledge that another human being is truly there. The body knows what it was made for. It has been carrying that knowledge for hundreds of thousands of years. The fact that we have extended the time in which we inhabit it does not erase that knowledge. It simply means that we carry it now into territory the body never expected to reach, and that we carry it as best we can with gratitude. For most of human history, humans did not live past 40. This was not a tragedy. It was a design shaped by millions of years of a universe that asked only one thing of the human body: that it live long enough and well enough and fully enough to pass something of itself forward into the future. We have added decades to that design. We have extended the blueprint far beyond its original specifications, and the body, ancient and imperfectly adapted and quietly extraordinary, is trying every day to be adequate to the extended life we have given it. That is enough, perhaps, to know that the body is trying, to know that the ache and the effort and the slow accumulation of years are not phases of design, but consequences of success. The success of a species that has extended itself so far past its biological origins that it can now, on a quiet night, lie still and wonder about the meaning of the very life it is living. The ancient body rests now, the grasslands are gone, the small campfires are gone, the 40-year lifespan is gone, but the body remains, breathing quietly in the dark, carrying its ancient knowledge into a world it was never designed for, doing what it has always done, surviving, adapting, continuing, in the quiet way of all living things. Sleep now. The body knows how to do this part. It has been doing it for a very long time. eofwc-c/home/claude/story.txt. There is a particular quality to the knowledge that comes only with years, not information. Information is available everywhere now, in quantities that would have been incomprehensible to any human being who lived before the age of writing, let alone the age of the internet. But knowledge, in the deep sense that the ancient world understood it, is different from information. Knowledge is information that has been tested against experience, held up against the light of reality, revised and refined through contact with the actual texture of a lived life. It takes time to make. It cannot be downloaded. It cannot be inherited directly or passed along intact. Every person who acquires it must acquire it the same way, by living long enough and paying close enough attention and being willing to be changed by what they encounter. In this sense, the older human being, the one who has outlived the design specifications of the body and found themselves in the extended territory of the 50s and 60s and 70s, carries something that is genuinely irreplaceable. Not just in the sentimental sense that we often use when we talk about the value of older people, but in a more fundamental, more biological, more evolutionarily meaningful sense. The knowledge they carry is the product of the one process that cannot be accelerated or simulated, living through time. For most of human history, this knowledge was extraordinarily practical. The elder remembered the flood of 30 years ago that had changed the course of the river and made the old ford impassable. They remembered the plague of insects that had destroyed the harvest 2 decades back and knew, from experience, which plants had been spared and why. They knew the patterns of animal migration not just this year, but across 10 years and 20 years and 30 years, knew the anomalies and the exceptions and the rare events that occurred only once in a generation, and that a person needed to have lived through to understand. This was survival knowledge. The group that had an elder with this kind of deep, time-tested, place-specific knowledge was measurably more likely to survive difficult conditions than a group without such a person. This is not speculation. It is the kind of thing that can be modelled mathematically. And when anthropologists and evolutionary biologists do model it, they find that the presence of older, knowledgeable individuals in a group significantly improves the group's survival probability, especially in times of environmental stress. From an evolutionary perspective, this is precisely the mechanism that's selected for extended human lifespan, beyond the strict reproductive cutoff. Not for everyone. Most people still died young and average lifespan remained low. But for some individuals, in some circumstances, surviving into the 50s and 60s and beyond provided enough benefit to the group that the genes contributing to that extended survival are passed forward gradually across thousands of generations. This is a different way of thinking about longevity than we usually use. We usually think of longevity as an individual achievement. My health, my choices, my genes, my luck. And it is all of those things. But it is also, in the deepest sense, a social achievement. The extended human lifespan did not evolve because individuals wanted to live longer. It evolved because groups that contained long-lived, knowledgeable individuals survived better than groups that didn't. Longevity in the ancient human world was not a private possession. It was community resource. This understanding has been almost entirely lost in the modern world. We treat the extended lifespan as an individual right, as something that each person is entitled to regardless of what they do with it, or what they contribute to the people around them, and in many ways this is a beautiful development. The extension of human dignity to every person regardless of their social utility. But it does obscure something important about the original evolutionary logic of human longevity, which was always and fundamentally social. In early human environments, the question of whether a particular elder was allowed to continue consuming the group's limited resources, food, shelter, the labour of younger members, was answered at least partly by whether the elder was still contributing something valuable enough to justify the cost, not callously, not cruelly, but with the quiet, practical logic of a community whose survival was never guaranteed and could not afford to carry members who contributed nothing. The elders who were valued and cared for were, in general, the elders who were still useful, the ones who remembered things, who could still work in limited ways, who cared for the young, who mediated disputes, who told the stories that held the group's identity together. This is an uncomfortable truth to sit with, because it seems to conflict with the values of care and dignity that now apply to older people regardless of their productive capacity. And I'm not suggesting that those values are wrong. They represent a genuine moral achievement of civilization, an extension of the circle of care beyond what the ancient logic of survival could have afforded. But understanding the ancient logic helps us to understand something about why the modern situation of the elderly is sometimes so difficult. Not just physically difficult, but existentially difficult. The ancient elder was embedded in a web of social necessity that gave their extended life meaning and context. The modern elder often is not. The search for meaning in extended life is, in a very real sense, a new problem for the human species. For most of human history, the meaning of life was not something that needed to be searched for. It was provided by the immediate, pressing, relentless demand of survival. Find food, maintain shelter, care for young, maintain social bonds, navigate the endless practical challenges of a life lived close to the physical world. There was no time to wonder about the meaning of life when the meaning of life was right there, immediate and demanding every single day. But the extended lifespan, combined with the extraordinary productive efficiency of modern civilization, has created for the first time in human history a situation in which large numbers of people have the time and the material security to ask the meaning question, to wonder what exactly they're still doing here, now that the most urgent biological demands of their life have been met, to look at the years stretching ahead of them and ask, what are these for? This is not a bad question. It may in fact be one of the most important questions that the long sweep of human evolution has produced. But it is a genuinely new question, one for which the ancient wisdom carried in our evolutionary heritage provides only partial guidance. The ancient body knows how to survive. It knows how to reproduce. It knows how to care for young and maintain social bonds and navigate physical challenges and remember things that matter for group survival. But it does not know, at any deep biological level, what to do with decades of life that stretch beyond all of those purposes. We are making up the answer as we go. Each generation of people living into their 70s and 80s and 90s is, in some sense, exploring new evolutionary territory for which the body provides no specific map, territory that the species is encountering for the first time in its history. The wisdom that comes from living in this territory is therefore a new kind of wisdom, not the practical survival wisdom of the ancient elder, but something more reflective, more philosophical, more concerned with meaning and less with immediate utility. And perhaps this is appropriate. Perhaps this is, in fact, the most remarkable thing about the extended human lifespan. Not that it allows us to keep working or keep producing or keep contributing in the ways that the ancient logic of survival valued, but that it creates, for the first time in the history of our species, a genuine space for reflection, time to look back across the full sweep of a life and understand it, time to think about what mattered and what didn't, time to see the patterns that only become visible from a sufficient distance. In early human environments, this kind of reflective distance was simply not available, not because ancient humans were incapable of reflection. The evidence of their art and their ritual and their careful preparation of the dead suggests that they were deeply reflective in their own way, but because the conditions of their lives did not often allow for the luxury of extended retrospection. The ancient human was, for most of their life, deeply and urgently embedded in the present moment, in the immediate demands of finding food and maintaining safety and caring for the people around them. Reflection was something that happened around the fire in the evenings, in the quiet hours between the day's work and sleep, not something that could be sustained across decades of relative leisure. We have built, through the extraordinary achievements of civilization, the conditions for sustained reflection. We have given ourselves, or some of us, time, and what we do with that time, how we fill the extended years that evolution never prepared us for, is perhaps the most interesting and most open question in the long history of the human species. If we look at what modern gerontology and psychology have learned about aging well, about what allows some people to navigate the extended years with genuine vitality and meaning, while others find them difficult and diminished, we find a set of factors that are, interestingly, deeply consistent with the conditions of ancestral human life: physical activity, social connection, purpose, a sense of contributing something to other people, of being needed, of having a reason to get up in the morning that extends beyond personal comfort, engagement with the natural world, the practice of skills that require ongoing learning and adaptation, the maintenance of close, face-to-face relationships with people who genuinely know and are known by them. These are not, when you think about them, modern discoveries. They are the conditions of hunter-gatherer life. They are what the body was designed for, to move, to connect, to contribute, to engage fully with the world around it. The ancient human who spent their 40 years in constant physical activity, embedded in a dense social network, contributing their skills and knowledge to the survival of a community they depended on. And that depended on them, surrounded by the sensory richness of the natural world. That ancient human was, in a profound sense, living exactly the life that promotes well-being in the human organism. And we, with our chairs and our screens and our carefully climate-controlled environments and our extraordinary material comfort and our often profound social isolation, are often living in the conditions that are most contrary to the body's design, not because we are foolish or perverse, but because the technological progress that has extended our lifespan and has also, in many cases, removed us from the conditions that make the lifespan most livable. This is not a simple problem, and there is no simple solution. The technology that creates the comfortable, sedentary, screen-mediated modern life is also the technology that has given us vaccines and antibiotics, and surgical techniques, and clean water, and the extension of lifespan itself. We cannot simply step back from modernity without stepping back from the very achievements that have given us the extended years we are trying to live well. But we can perhaps understand what we are missing. We can understand why the body responds so positively to movement and social connection and purposeful activity. Not because these are good ideas that someone has thought up, but because they are the conditions for which the body was designed, the conditions in which its ancient systems function most effectively, the conditions that the 100,000-year history of the human organism has built into its deepest structures. From an evolutionary perspective, the modern human is in a strange and unprecedented position. We have, through our own ingenuity and cooperation, extended the lifespan far beyond its biological design specifications. We have used our extraordinary cognitive capacities, the same capacities that evolved to help us survive in the Paleolithic, to create a world in which the Paleolithic challenges are mostly gone, replaced by new and different challenges that our ancient biology was not prepared for, and we are now, slowly, and sometimes painfully, trying to figure out how to live well in the extended life we have made for ourselves, and thus maintain the physical vitality that the body requires. How to maintain the social connections that the body craves. How to find purpose and meaning in years that evolution never had occasion to fill with meaning. How to navigate the gradual changes of aging, the losses of function and capacity, and sometimes of the people we love, with the equanimity that the ancient world, with its shorter and more brutal expectations, never had to develop. These are not easy tasks. They were never going to be easy. We are living in evolutionary novelty in the extra chapters of a story that was supposed to end much earlier, and we are writing those chapters without a template, making them up as we go, learning from each other and from the limited experience of previous generations who faced the same challenges. But there is something in understanding the deep history of the body, the fact that it was shaped for a life very different from the one we lead, the fact that it carries within it the traces of hundreds of thousands of years of survival in a world that is largely gone, that makes the challenges of aging feel different, less like personal failures, less like the failures of a body that is not doing what it should, more like the inevitable consequences of being an ancient creature in a modern world, carrying ancient machinery through territory that the machinery was never designed for. The body that carries you is extraordinary, not because it is perfect, or because it will last forever, or because it ages gracefully without cost or difficulty, but because it has lasted this long at all, because it is doing something that its designers never asked it to do, because it's carrying you through a life that is longer and more complex and more reflective than any human life that came before it in the hundreds of thousands of years of human existence. And that, when you settle into the quiet of it, is something worth holding gently, not with pride or with anxiety, just with a quiet, grounded appreciation for the improbable fact being here, in this extended life, in this ancient body, in this strange and beautiful and unprecedented world. There is a certain quality to thinking about the deep past of our species that functions, perhaps, as its own kind of medicine. Not the medicine of pills and procedures, but the medicine of perspective. To step back in the imagination from the daily preoccupations of a modern life, the small anxieties, the accumulating fatigue, the sense that things are not going as they should, and to see the body from a much greater distance, to see it not as a machine that is failing, but as an ancient instrument that has been played, and played hard, and that is now being asked to play notes it was never written for. There is humility in this perspective, and there is, strangely, comfort, because the body that aches and tires and gradually slows down is not failing. It is simply being honest about what it is, a product of evolution, shaped for a world that is gone, doing its best in a world it never expected to inhabit for this long. For most of human history, humans did not live past 40. The ones who did were remarkable. They were the keepers of knowledge, the holders of memory, the connective tissue of communities that could not survive without them. And they were, in the deepest sense, living in territory that was as new and unmapped for them as the territory of our extended modern lives is for us. They figured it out, imperfectly, tentatively, one difficult year at a time. They kept going, in the way that the body keeps going when it is still capable of going. Because that is what the body does. It survives, it adapts, it continues. And perhaps that is the oldest and most essential wisdom that the long history of human longevity has to offer. Not a specific technique or a particular practice, but a disposition, the disposition of continuing, of meeting each day that arrives with the particular mixture of pragmatism and gratitude that comes from truly understanding how improbable it is that the day has arrived at all. The body is designed for 40 years. You've been given more. Whatever more looks like, whatever condition it finds you in, it is more than the design specified. It is the bonus chapters of a book that is already complete. Read them slowly. There is no rush. The night is quiet now. The ancient body is tired. It has been a long day and a long life, and a long history that stretches back through the grasslands and the savannas and the small temporary camps of a species that has been, against all odds and all biological expectation, finding ways to continue for hundreds of thousands of years. The designs of evolution are not the designs of fate. They are the beginning of a conversation between the body and the world, a conversation that has been going on for a very long time. It continues now in the dark, in the quiet breathing of a body at rest, doing what it was designed to do, even at the end of a long day that is itself the end of a long sequence of days that extends back further than any individual mind can truly hold. Rest now. The body knows this part. It has always known this part. And the knowing is very old and very quiet and very deep. like a long, slow breath of a species that have been finding ways to sleep in the dark in every kind of world for longer than memory can reach. Sleep now, the ancient body rests, and will be ready in the morning to continue. There is something worth exploring more carefully about the specific biology of what happens after the body crosses the threshold that evolution never optimized for. Not in a clinical way, not with charts and statistics and the dry language of medical textbooks, but in the slow, patient way of someone trying to understand what it actually feels like from the inside to inhabit a body that is doing something its designers never anticipated. Consider sleep. Sleep is one of the most ancient and most fundamental of all biological processes. Every complex animal sleeps, or does something so similar to sleep that the difference is difficult to define. The brain requires sleep in the same way that the lungs require air. Absolutely, without exception, with consequences that become rapidly catastrophic when the requirement is not met. And the way humans sleep, the duration, the architecture, the relationship between sleep and light and temperature and social contact, was shaped entirely by the conditions of the ancestral world. In early human environments, sleep was organized around the natural cycle of light and darkness. When the sun set, the world became genuinely dark. Not the muted dimness of a modern bedroom with its light pollution and glowing devices, but the deep, comprehensive darkness of a world without artificial light. In this darkness, the body's internal clock, the circadian system driven by a small cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, began to produce the hormone melatonin, signaling to every cell in the body that it was time to shift into the physiological mode of rest and repair. The ancient human probably slept in what sleep researchers call a biphasic pattern, a longer period of sleep in the night and a shorter rest period in the middle of the day when the temperature peaked and active hunting or foraging was difficult. This pattern is still visible in many traditional cultures around the world and still makes physiological sense. The body's internal clock has 2 natural periods of peak sleepiness in each 24-hour cycle, one in the early morning hours before dawn and one in the early afternoon. The modern world has flattened this pattern into a single monophasic sleep period, usually at night, because the demands of industrial schedules don't accommodate afternoon rest. But the body still remembers the older pattern, which is why the desire to rest after lunch is not a weakness or an indulgence, but a feature of the ancient biological design. The quality of sleep in the ancient world was almost certainly different from the quality of sleep in the modern world, and probably better in many respects. Not because ancient humans were inherently better sleepers, but because the conditions for sleep were better aligned with the body's requirements. The absence of artificial light meant that the circadian system received clear, unambiguous signals about the time of day. The physical exhaustion of a life of constant movement meant that the sleep pressure, the drive towards sleep that accumulates throughout the day, was strong by nightfall. The social environment of sleeping in a group, with the warmth and presence of other bodies, provided the ancient nervous system with signals of safety that reduced the physiological arousal that interferes with sleep. As the body ages past its design specifications, sleep changes in ways that are deeply consistent with what we know about the biology of aging. The circadian system becomes less robust. The amplitude of the melatonin signal decreases. The ability to achieve and sustain the deepest stages of sleep, a slow-wave sleep that is most important for physical restoration and memory consolidation, declines measurably from the 30s onward. The older person wakes more easily, sleeps more lightly, and finds it harder to return to sleep after waking in the night. They may find that the 7 or 8 hours that felt effortless at 30 now seems impossible to achieve at 60 or 70. This is not a pathology. It is the aging of a system that was built to run for 40 years and is now being asked to run for 80. The circadian clock, like the cardiovascular system and the immune system and the cellular repair machinery, shows the same pattern of gradual decline that characterizes aging throughout the body. It continues to function. It never stops functioning entirely, in the way that the heart continues to beat and the immune system continues to respond. But it functions with less precision and less resilience than it did in youth. Understanding this helps perhaps in the small hours of the night when the older body wakes and cannot return to sleep. This is not failure. This is the ancient machinery running somewhat past its optimal range, doing what it can, producing the best sleep it can produce in circumstances it was not designed for. The ancient elder, who woke in the night, did not have the option of reaching for a screen or a book or the pharmaceutical aids that the modern world provides. They lay in the darkness, or they sat by the fire, or they just talked quietly with whoever else was awake, and they waited for the sleep to return because they had no choice, and because the sleep always did return. Eventually, as the body's need for rest eventually overcame even the fragmented aging of the circadian system. In early human environments, the aging of the sleep system would have been largely invisible against the background of everything else that was happening in the body at that age. The elder who slept less deeply than they had at 30 was also managing a dozen other processes of biological change. The increasing stiffness of joints, the slowing of metabolic rate, the changing efficiency of the immune system. All of these changes were part of the same fundamental process, the gradual withdrawal of the evolutionary investment into maintenance and repair that the body had made during the reproductive years. This is, when you sit with it long enough, a kind of biological wisdom. The body does not stop working when the reproductive years end. It does not simply switch off. It recalibrates. It redirects its resources in ways that make sense given the original evolutionary design. Less energy to the rapid repair and aggressive immune responses and high-intensity hormonal environments of youth. More to the slower, quieter maintenance processes that allow the body to keep functioning, diminished but continuing for years or decades beyond the original design life. This recalibration is not smooth or painless. It is experienced as a gradual accumulation of difficulties, each small in itself but cumulatively significant. The joints that ache in the morning, the recovery from physical exertion that takes longer than it once did, the gradual changes in vision and hearing that come from decades of use, these shifts in memory and cognitive processing that reflect the aging of the most metabolically expensive organ the body contains. These are not failures. They are the sounds of a body recalibrating itself for a life it was never asked to plan for, adjusting its resources as best it can to the conditions it finds itself in. Consider what happens in the brain specifically as it moves through the decades past the design limit. The human brain is an extraordinary organ, the most complex structure that evolution has produced, as far as we know, in the entire history of life on this planet. It contains approximately 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others through synaptic contacts that allow them to communicate with each other in patterns of extraordinary complexity. The total number of synaptic connections in a single human brain is estimated to be somewhere in the hundreds of trillions, a number so large that it barely registers as a number at all, more a conceptual placeholder for something genuinely beyond ordinary comprehension. This organ was shaped, like everything else in the human body, primarily for the conditions of the ancestral world. It was shaped to be brilliant at the tasks that the ancestral world required, tracking prey across complex terrain, maintaining detailed social maps of every relationship in the group, learning the geography of a large range and navigating it without instruments, understanding the seasonal patterns of plants and animals, managing the intricate social dynamics of a group of 20 or 30 or 50 people living in very close proximity, learning language with a speed and flexibility that is unmatched in the animal kingdom. The brain is very good at these things, astonishingly good when the conditions are right, but it was not optimized for reading and writing, or for managing large bureaucratic systems, or for processing the constant stream of information that the modern world produces, or for making decisions about financial instruments, or for any of the other distinctly modern cognitive tasks that many people spend most of their waking hours performing. It can do these things. The remarkable generality of human intelligence allows the ancestral brain to be applied to tasks it never evolved for. But it does not do them with the same effortless ease that it displays when performing the tasks it was actually designed for. As the brain ages, these patterns become more apparent. The domains where the aging brain declines most obviously: processing speed, working memory capacity, the ability to rapidly acquire and consolidate new information, are the domains most dependent on the raw computational power of neural circuits that are themselves subject to the same aging processes affecting every other tissue in the body. Neurons age. Their mitochondria become less efficient. Their synaptic connections become less precise. The myelin sheaths that allow rapid electrical signaling along neural fibers degrade over decades of use. But the domains where the aging brain maintains its capacity, and sometimes improves, vocabulary, semantic knowledge, the ability to recognize patterns across complex social situations, the capacity for emotional regulation, are precisely the domains most relevant to the ancestral role of the elder, the knowledge carrier, the story keeper, the person who remembered what had happened before and could say, with the quiet authority of lived experience, that this had happened before and that it was survivable. This is not a coincidence. The trajectory of cognitive aging in humans, rapid decline in the capacities most associated with raw neural speed and novelty, maintenance or improvement in the capacities most associated with accumulated experience, maps precisely onto the division of cognitive labour between the young and the old that characterises healthy human communities in the anthropological record. The young are fast and flexible and brilliant at acquiring and applying new information. The old are deep and stable and brilliant at recognising patterns and maintaining the long-term perspective that accumulated years alone can provide. These are not competing strengths, they are complementary ones, and for most of human history, the healthy functioning of a human group required both. If we look at what the neuroscience of aging tells us about how to maintain the brain's function across the extended lifespan, we find, again, the unmistakable echo of ancestral conditions. Physical activity is consistently the most powerful intervention known to maintain brain health across aging. Not because it's generally good for the body, though it is, but because the brain itself is deeply responsive to the physiological signals of physical activity. The increase in cerebral blood flow the cascade of growth factors, including brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the anti-inflammatory effects of regular movement on the neural tissue. A brain that is regularly asked to support physical activity receives constant biological signals that maintain its function in ways that a brain living in a sedentary body does not. Social connection has similar effects. The brain that maintains rich, face-to-face social engagement, the kind of dense, complex, emotionally significant social interaction that characterized the ancient human group, shows measurably better maintenance of cognitive function across aging than the brain living in social isolation. Again, this is not simply because social engagement is pleasant, though it is. It is because the brain was designed to operate in a rich social environment, and when it is deprived of that environment, it does not function as well as it was designed to function. And purpose, the sense of contributing something meaningful to other people, of being needed, of having tasks that require skill and attention, and provide genuine value to others, has effects on the aging brain that mirror its effects across all ages. Engagement, vitality, the continued recruitment of the neural circuits most associated with motivation and reward, and the sustained cognitive effort that keeps those circuits strong. These findings, taken together, paint a picture that is both scientifically rigorous and deeply ancient. The brain ages most gracefully when it is given the conditions of the ancestral world: movement, social connection, purposeful activity, the sensory richness of genuine engagement with other people and with the physical environment. These are not sophisticated modern discoveries. They are the conditions that the brain was built for and that it still requires, regardless of how many centuries have passed since those conditions were the universal facts of human life. In early human environments, nobody had to be told to exercise or to maintain social connections or to remain purposefully engaged. These were not prescriptions. They were simply the conditions of existence. There was no alternative to movement in a world where every calorie required physical effort to acquire. There was no alternative to social connection in a world where the group was all that stood between the individual and death. There was no alternative to purposeful engagement in a world where every day presented genuine and urgent problems that required skill and effort to solve. We have removed most of those problems, and in doing so we have removed most of the conditions that kept the ancient body and brain functioning well. We have traded necessity for choice, and the challenge of the extended modern lifespan is, in large part, the challenge of choosing, deliberately and consistently, the conditions that the body still needs, even though the world no longer provides them automatically. This is harder than it sounds, not because people are lazy or foolish, but because the conditions of modern life create enormous pressure in the opposite direction. The chair is more comfortable than the walk. The screen provides stimulation that requires no physical effort. The social connection offered by digital communication requires no coordination of schedules or navigation of physical space. The choice of purposeful engagement over passive consumption is available, but requires effort that the ancient environment never made available. The body knows the difference, not consciously, not in the way that a person knows things consciously, but in the quiet, biological, cellular way that the ancient systems of the body always knew things, through the chemistry of hormones and neurotransmitters, through the changes in the functioning of the immune system and the cardiovascular system and the brain that follow from the conditions of daily life. The body that moves responds differently at a cellular level from the body that sits still. The brain that's socially engaged responds differently from the brain that's isolated. The organism that has purpose responds differently from the organism that has only comfort. These differences accumulate across years and decades in ways that become eventually visible as differences in health and vitality and the quality of the extended years that modern medicine has made possible, not as moral judgments. There is no moral failure in the difficulty of choosing ancient conditions in a modern world. But as consequences, as the quiet biological logic of a body that was designed for one kind of world and is living in another, understanding this does not make the choices easier, but it gives them a different quality perhaps. Not the quality of prescriptions to be followed for health outcomes, but the quality of returns to origins. Choices that bring the ancient body back, at least partially, into the conditions it was designed for, and that allow it to function, at least partially, in the way that its long, evolutionary history prepared it to function. The walk in the open air is not just exercise. It is the body moving through the world in the way that it moved for hundreds of thousands of years, its sensory systems engaged with real terrain, real weather, and real distance, its proprioceptive systems receiving the feedback that they were designed to receive from the ground underfoot, its cardiovascular system performing the task it was built to perform. The conversation with a friend face to face is not just pleasant. It is the brain performing the social processing that constitutes its most fundamental design purpose. Reading the face and the voice and the posture of another person with a precision and a responsiveness that no digital medium can fully replicate. The task that requires skill and attention and produces something of value is not just a hobby, it is the ancient neural reward system doing what it was built to do, generating the motivation and satisfaction that follow from genuine competence and genuine contribution. These are the notes that the ancient instrument was built to play, and when it plays them, even imperfectly, even in the extended years for which it was never designed, there is something that functions like recognition. Not the sharp surprise of novelty, but the deeper, quieter satisfaction of rightness, of a thing being used for the purpose for which it was made. For most of human history, that recognition was not something that anyone needed to pursue. It arrived automatically with every day of a life that was organized entirely around the requirements of survival in a physical world. The body moved and connected and engaged because there was no alternative. The instrument played its notes because nothing else was possible. Now the alternatives are everywhere. The comfortable alternatives, the convenient alternatives, the alternatives that require nothing from the body and provide something to the brain, but not the kind of something that the brain was built to find most deeply satisfying. And navigating between these alternatives, choosing the ancient over the comfortable when the comfortable is so readily available, is the central challenge of living well in an extended modern life. Not because the comfortable is bad, not because rest and ease and the pleasures of a settled, secure, materially rich life are wrong, but because the body still carries within it the accumulated requirements of a very different kind of life, and those requirements do not disappear simply because the world no longer imposes them. They remain in the biology of the cells, and the chemistry of the brain, and the ancient wisdom of systems that have been in use for much longer than civilization has existed, and honouring those requirements, even partially, even imperfectly, even in the limited ways that modern life makes possible, is one of the things that allows the extended lifespan to be something more than mere duration. It is what allows the extra chapters to be genuinely written, rather than simply pass through. The ancient body contains within it the memory of everything that came before. The grasslands, the migrations, the seasons of plenty and the seasons of scarcity. The small fires and the dark nights and the dense necessary presence of other human beings. Their work of hands and the movement of feet and the deep physical knowledge of the world that comes only from contact with it over years and decades. This memory is not conscious. It is not something that can be accessed by thinking. It is cellular, systemic, written into the structure of the body itself, in the same patient way that all of the Vervolution's writing is done. Not in words, but in the shapes of proteins and the rhythms or hormones and the wiring of neural circuits that were laid down before the species had words at all. But it is there, and sometimes in the right conditions. In movement, in connection, in purposeful engagement, in the sensory richness of genuine contact with the natural world, it can be felt. Not as a memory exactly, more as a quality of aliveness, a sense of the body functioning in something close to its original key, finding the notes it was built for. However different the world in which it now plays them, this is not a romantic idea. It is a biological one. The conditions that make the body feel most alive are, in very large part, the conditions that the body was designed for. And understanding this, truly understanding it, not just as an interesting idea, but as a living reality, can change the way that the extended years are inhabited. Not with desperation, not with the urgent pursuit of ancient conditions as though they were health prescriptions to be followed precisely, but with a kind of gentle attentiveness to what the body is telling you about what it needs. An attentiveness that is easier to maintain when you understand where that telling comes from and how deep it goes. The body that you inhabit has been finding ways to survive for a very long time. It knows more about survival than any conscious mind can fully hold. It knows about drought and plenty, about cold and warmth, about the specific chemical pleasure of movement, and the specific cellular need for rest, and the specific, irreplaceable comfort of genuine human contact. It knows all of this, not in words, but in ways that are deeper than words, in the ancient language of chemistry and rhythm and response. Listening to the knowing, even imperfectly, even partially, even with all the noise and distraction of modern life making it harder to hear, is one of the quieter arts of the extended lifespan. Not the art of living forever. Not the art of reversing aging or defeating biology or escaping the consequences of the evolutionary trade that shaped every cell in your body. But the art of living fully in the time that is given, in the ancient body that carries you through it. For most of human history, that body lasted 40 years. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was a full life in a world that asked everything of it and received everything it had to give. We have more than 40 years. Many of us have twice that, and in those additional years in the extra territory that medicine and civilization have opened for us, we are still carrying the same ancient body, still subject to its requirements and its limitations and its deep biological wisdom about what it needs to function well. The question of how to live in the extended lifespan is ultimately the question of how to live in honest relationship with this ancient body, to give it what it needs, where we can, to understand its limitations without condemning it for them, to appreciate the extraordinary fact of its continued functioning, hour by hour, day by day, year by year, the conditions it was never designed for, and in the quiet of the very late night to let it rest. to allow the ancient systems of restoration and repair to do their slow, patient work, to trust that the sleep that comes is doing what sleep has always done. For every human being who has ever lived, knitting the day back together, restoring the cellular machinery that the day has used, preparing the body for whatever tomorrow requires. This is very old. This is older than history. This is the oldest thing that human bodies do. Rest now. Let the ancient machinery do its work. It knows what it is doing. It has always known. The grasslands are quiet, the fires are low. The long human story continues, as it has always continued in the breathing dark. Sleep. There is a particular kind of question that only becomes available to a species that has lived long enough to look back at itself. Not the practical questions of survival. Where is water? Where is food? What is that sound in the darkness? But the deeper questions, the questions that require sufficient distance from immediate necessity to even form. Why are we here? What does this mean? What have we been doing for all this time? These questions are new in the scale of the species. They are perhaps 20 or 30,000 years old, based on the evidence of cave art and ritual burial and the other marks of reflective consciousness that begin to appear in the archaeological record during the Upper Paleolithic. And they are certainly more than 100,000 years old in some form, since the evidence of symbolic behaviours and deliberate cultural transmission goes back that far at least. But in the full sweep of human evolution, which stretches back 200,000 years for our own species and millions of years for the broader lineage that led to us, these reflective questions are very recent. They are the questions of a species that has recently acquired enough cognitive capacity to contemplate its own existence. The extension of the individual lifespan is, in a sense, a continuation of this same process. The species that first became capable of reflecting on its own nature has now extended individual life long enough that individual human beings can reflect on their own natures with something like completeness. A person of 70 or 80 has a stuff of the arc behind them to see something of the pattern. Not the whole pattern. The whole pattern is never visible from inside it, but enough. Enough to see that some things that seemed enormously important at 30 were, in retrospect, minor. Enough to see that some things that seemed minor were, in retrospect, the things that mattered most. Enough to know that the body which carried them through all of it was remarkable and fragile and ancient and worthy of a gratitude that is different from the gratitude of the young, more complex, more earned, more aware of what it cost. From an evolutionary perspective, this capacity for retrospective understanding is another gift of the extended lifespan. The ancient hunter-gatherer who died at 40 had some of this capacity, but not the depth that comes from truly long experience. The person of 70 who has watched their children grow and their parents age and their world change dramatically has a perspective on time and change and the relative importance of things that simply cannot be acquired any other way. This perspective is not superior in every respect to the perspective of the young. The young see things with a freshness and immediacy and openness to possibility that time sometimes obscures. But it is a genuine form of understanding, one that contributes something to the human community that youth cannot provide. This is, in a sense, the evolutionary justification for the extended lifespan that evolution itself never had time to develop. The grandmother hypothesis provides one rationale. The older person's practical help with food provision and childcare increases group survival. But there is another rationale that operates more slowly and more subtly. The older person's capacity for the kind of deep pattern-based understanding that only comes from long experience adds something to the culture and the knowledge base of the human community that cannot be replaced by any other means. In a world that changes as rapidly as the modern world, this capacity is often undervalued. The knowledge that was current and useful 30 years ago is often obsolete today. The elder who remembers how things were done before the digital revolution may not have practical knowledge that transfers easily to the current world, but the elder who has watched patterns repeat, who's seen the rhythm of booms and busts, the cycle of certainty and disillusionment, the way that each generation confidently believes that it has finally understood things correctly and then discovers in due time that it has been partially wrong. That elder carries something that is genuinely, permanently valuable, not the specific content of their knowledge, which may indeed be dated, but the understanding that everything is more complex than it looks, that confidence is a phase, that humility is not weakness but the truest form of wisdom. This is what the very old know when they know anything. Not the answers. The very old have usually lost whatever certainty about answers they once had, but the questions, the slow, patient, philosophically honest questions that are the product of having been wrong enough times in enough different ways to understand that the questions are better than any specific answer could ever be. In early human environments, the elder who'd reached this kind of settled uncertainty was a community resource of a particular kind. Not the elder who still remembered practical survival knowledge, though some did, but the elder who had achieved a certain equanimity with the unknown, who could sit with the young person's fear and say, with genuine authority, "I don't know either. But I have not known before many times, and I am still here." And that carries something. The ability to tolerate uncertainty with equanimity, to function, and to function well in the permanent condition of not knowing, is one of the psychological achievements most strongly associated with wisdom in the research literature on aging. It is not the achievement of everyone who lives long. It is the achievement of those who have lived long and paid attention, who have used the time of extended life not merely to accumulate more experiences, but to actually learn from the experiences they have had, to let those experiences work on them, to be changed by them in the deep way that genuine change happens. This is a different project from the project of physical survival, which was the main project of the human body for most of its history. It is the project of psychological and philosophical development, which is only possible when the basic conditions of survival have been sufficiently secured to create the space for it. And it is a project that the extended human lifespan has made available for the first time in the history of the species, not just to the ascetic or the occasional philosopher, but to large numbers of ordinary people living ordinary lives in a world that has, however imperfectly, taken some of the most brutal features of the struggle for survival off the table. This is worth acknowledging, even in the quiet of a late night. The extended lifespan that we now live, the one that the body was never designed for, has created conditions for a kind of human development that was simply unavailable for most of the history of the species. Not development in the sense of accumulating more achievements, or more possessions, or more experiences, but development in the sense of deepening, of becoming more fully oneself, of understanding more honestly what one actually values, of achieving the kind of settled, compassionate, clear-eyed relationship with reality that the research on wisdom identifies as the highest expression of what the extended human mind can do. The body, ancient, and is perfectly adapted and working hard at something it was never designed to do. It's carrying this development. It is the vehicle, the instrument, the only medium through which all of this is possible. And it deserves, perhaps, more respect than we routinely give it for the extraordinary fact of its continued service. Consider the height. The average human heart beats roughly once per second, which means that over the course of a day it beats approximately 90,000 times, and over the course of a year approximately 33 million times, and over the course of a life of 80 years approximately 2.6 billion times. It does this without rest. There is no off switch, no maintenance pause, no period of recovery, sustained only by the continuous delivery of oxygenated blood through the coronary arteries that circle it, and by the electrical system that coordinates the contraction of its four chambers, and by the remarkable cellular machinery of the cardiac muscle cells that converts chemical energy to mechanical work with an efficiency that human engineering still struggles to match. The heart that has been beating for 70 or 80 years is a different organ from the heart of 20. Its walls are slightly thicker. Its valves have accumulated small amounts of calcification. The arteries that supply it have stiffened somewhat, requiring the heart to work harder to push blood through a less elastic system. The electrical system that coordinates its beating has become slightly less precise, contributing to the increased incidence of arrhythmias in older hearts. These changes are real, they matter, they contribute to the cardiovascular disease that is the leading cause of death in the developed world, and yet the heart that has been beating for 70 or 80 years has also been beating for 70 or 80 years. It has sustained life through illness and injury and grief and physical exertion and the 1,000 ordinary and extraordinary challenges of a long human life. It has not stopped. It has never asked to stop. It has continued, hour after hour, decade after decade, performing the same fundamental task with a reliability that is, when you actually think about it, almost incomprehensible. The ancient body is an extraordinary thing, not because it is perfect. It is very far from perfect, and becomes less perfect with each passing decade of extended use, but because it is durable in ways that were never planned, resilient in ways that were never designed, capable of carrying human life through conditions and across timescales that evolution never prepared it for, and doing so with a commitment and a continuity that deserves more acknowledgement than we usually give it. There's a quiet meditation to be had in the late hours of the night about the body's unwavering loyalty to life. It does not decide from day to day whether to continue. It simply continues. The heart continues to beat. The lungs continue to breathe. The kidneys continue to filter. The brain continues to generate the electrical patterns that constitute consciousness. All of this continues, without decision and without doubt, until it can no longer continue, and then it stops. This is the entirety of the body's contract with life. To continue for as long as it is capable of continuing, and to stop when it is not. There is something deeply calming about this, when you come to it in the right frame of mind. The body is not trying to survive. It is not anxious about its own continuation. It is not calculating odds or making decisions or experiencing the existential terror of its own mortality. It is simply continuing as it has always continued, as it has been continuing since the first cells that could be called ancestors of the human body began their ancient work of converting chemical energy into the emotion of life. The mind that lives inside the body is different. The mind is aware of its own continuation in a way that the body is not, and that awareness is both the great gift and the great burden of human consciousness. The mind can plan and anticipate and remember and regret and hope and fear in ways that no other known form of consciousness can match. And the mind is aware of death in a way that makes the body's cheerful, unconscious continuity seem, by contrast, both enviable and unreachable. But perhaps there is a way of inhabiting the body's relationship to its own continuation that the mind can partially access. Not by suppressing the mind's awareness, that is neither possible nor desirable, but by resting, sometimes, in the body's way of being alive, the breath that comes without decision, the heartbeat that persists without effort, the warmth of living tissue doing what living tissue does right now in this moment, without anxiety about the next moment or grief about the last. This is very old. This is the oldest thing that living things do. And accessing it, even briefly, even partially, is one of the things that the late night and the still room and the resting body make possible. The mind quiets, the plans and the fears and the memories and the anticipations settle toward the background. And what remains is the simple fact of being alive, in this ancient body, in this particular moment of the long human story. For most of human history, humans did not have the luxury of this kind of reflection. The immediate demands of survival were too pressing, too constant, too consuming to allow the mind to rest in the simple fact of aliveness. But the extended lifespan and the material security that makes it possible has created the conditions in which this rest is available. Not just sleep, though sleep is part of it, the oldest and most necessary part, but the deeper rest of a mind that has, for a moment, set down the burden of its own continuity and simply resided in the fact of it. This is perhaps what the late-night meditations of the very old most often arrive at. Not answers, not the resolution of the great questions, but a kind of settled ease with the mystery of it all, with the fact of being here, in this body, in this brief and improbable extension of a life that was never designed to last this long, and finding in that improbability something that is not quite beauty but is close to it, something that is not quite peace but is adjacent to it, something that the body has been carrying in its ancient cellular wisdom through every moment of the extended years. The body knows how to do this. It had been practicing for a very long time. Rest now. The ancient instrument settles into the dark. The breathing slows, the heartbeat continues as it has always continued, quiet and certain and deep. The grasslands and the forests and the small campfires are a long way away, but the body remembers them. And in the remembering, in the deep, cellular, wordless memory of what it means to be alive and ancient and continuing, there is something that feels at last like home. Sleep now. The long human story continues, even in sleep, even here, even now. And yet there is more to say, because the story of the human body and its relationship to the years it was never designed for is not finished. It will not be finished for some time. Every generation that inherits this ancient body and carries it through the extended decades is adding new chapters to a story that evolution began but never anticipated completing. And in those chapters, certain themes recur with a consistency that suggests they are not merely cultural but biological. Not invented by civilization but discovered by it, found in the ancient structure of the body itself. One of those themes is the relationship between the body and time. The human body experiences time in a way that is unique, as far as we know, among all the organisms that have ever lived on this planet. Not just the passing of time in the biological sense, the circadian rhythms, the seasonal responses, the cellular aging that marks the passage of years in every tissue, but the psychological experience of time, the sense of duration, of before and after, of a personal narrative that extends backward into memory and forward into anticipation. This psychological experience of time is itself an evolutionary achievement. The brain regions most responsible for it, particularly the hippocampus, the structure most central to the formation and retrieval of episodic memory, are among the most recently evolved structures in the human brain, and they are among the structures most distinctively developed in humans compared to other primates. The ability to place oneself in time, to remember the past and anticipate the future, and understand oneself as a continuous entity extending through both, is one of the cognitive capacities most closely associated with the full expression of human consciousness. It is also, unfortunately, one of the cognitive capacities most affected by aging. The hippocampus is one of the brain regions that shows measurable volume decline earliest in aging, and it is one of the regions most affected by the pathological processes that cause dementia. The capacity that most makes us feel like ourselves, the sense of being a continuous person with a history and a future, is one of the first capacities to become fragile in the aging brain. This is a profound vulnerability, and it is one that is difficult to think about without feeling some of the existential weight that makes these thoughts so challenging. The loss of the continuous self, the slow erosion of the narrative that connects who we are now to who we were 30 or 50 years ago, is one of the most distressing aspects of advanced aging for the person experiencing it and for the people around them. But even here, in this most difficult territory, the evolutionary perspective offers something. The hippocampal formation that's so vulnerable to aging is a structure that was built, like everything else in the brain, for the conditions of the ancestral world. And the conditions of the ancestral world were conditions of constant novelty and physical engagement. The hippocampus forms new memories most effectively when the body is physically active, when the environment is genuinely novel and engaging, when the social context is rich and complex. The sedentary, repetitive, relatively isolated conditions that many older adults actually live in are, from a hippocampal perspective, some of the worst possible conditions for maintaining the structure's function. This is not a counsel of despair. It is again an invitation to understand what the body needs. The brain that is regularly introduced to genuinely novel experiences, new routes, new social contacts, new skills, new places, new ideas, is providing its hippocampus with the stimulation that structure was designed to receive. The brain that moves through a varied physical environment every day is providing its hippocampal system with the proprioceptive and spatial information that was its original purpose. The brain that maintains rich social relationships is providing its memory systems with the complex emotional context in which human memory has always been most deeply embedded. These are not guarantee protections against dementia. The pathological processes that cause Alzheimer's disease and other dementias involve mechanisms that go beyond what lifestyle can fully address. But they are, consistently and across many studies, associated with reduced risk and delayed onset. They are what the ancient body asks for, and when the ancient body is given what it asks for, it functions better, not perfectly, not forever, but better than it would otherwise. In early human environments, the older person who is still physically active, still socially embedded, still cognitively engaged with the challenges and novelties of survival was simply living the life that their body required. They were not following a wellness program. They were just being alive in the conditions that the body was built for. And those conditions automatically provided the hippocampus and the rest of the aging brain with the stimulation and the engagement that maintained its function as long as it was possible to maintain it. We have to choose those conditions. We have to choose them deliberately against the pull of easier alternatives in a world that offers comfort and convenience precisely where the ancient body most needs challenge and engagement. This is not a small thing. It requires a certain kind of understanding, a certain kind of commitment, a certain kind of respect for what the body is and what it needs and why. But the understanding's available. The knowledge of what the ancient body requires is not hidden. It is written into the research literature of evolutionary biology and physical anthropology and neuroscience and gerontology, and it consistently points in the same direction, toward movement, connection, purpose, novelty, and the conditions that most closely approximate the ancestral environment that shaped the body in the first place. This is the quiet message of the extended human lifespan. Not that we have transcended our biology, we have not transcended it. We carry it with us into every decade, into every year, into every day, and every breath and every heartbeat. But we have been given time, more time than any human beings in the history of the species have had, to inhabit that biology with understanding, to give it what it needs, to honour the ancient instrument by using it as it was intended to be used. Not for 40 years. We have more than 40 years. Most of us in the modern world will have many more than 40 years. And in those extra years, those evolutionary bonus chapters, we have the opportunity to discover what happens when the ancient body is treated with genuine understanding and genuine care. In a world that has never before offered the combination of material security and scientific knowledge that makes such care possible. What happens, the evidence suggests, is that the body continues, imperfectly, with increasing difficulty, with the gradual accumulation of the costs of its extended use. But it continues. The heart keeps beating. The brain keeps thinking. The person inside the body keeps living, keeps learning, keeps finding in the ancient instrument new capacities that the evolutionary design never specifically planned for, but also never specifically excluded. The human body was never designed to live past 40. That is a biological fact, supported by the evidence of evolution and paleontology, and the study of human remains across hundreds of thousands of years. But the human body, finding itself living past 40, has not simply collapsed. It has adapted, imperfectly but genuinely, to conditions it was never prepared for. It has found ways to continue, to function, to carry the person inside it through decades of experience and reflection, and the accumulation of a kind of wisdom that evolution never had to produce. This is, in the most fundamental sense, what the human story has always been. Not the story of a species perfectly adapted to its environment and doing what it was designed to do, but the story of a species that repeatedly finds itself in conditions it was never designed for, and that repeatedly, imperfectly, messily, at enormous cost and with remarkable ingenuity, finds ways to continue. The early humans who migrated out of Africa and into the cold of northern climates were not designed for cold. They adapted. The early humans who developed agriculture and settled into cities were not designed for the density and the infectious disease load of urban life. They adapted over many generations and also invented the medicine that helped manage what biology alone could not handle. The modern humans who now live into their 80s and 90s in bodies designed for 40 are not designed for this either. And they are adapting imperfectly and ingeniously, one lifetime at a time. Every person who navigates the extended years with whatever grace they can muster, who keeps moving when it would be easier to sit still, who maintains the social connections that sustain the ancient nervous system, who finds purpose in contributing to others even when the body makes contribution more difficult, is adding something to the collective human understanding of what the extra decades can be. Not a template, not a prescription, but a life lived fully in the perfect, ancient, extraordinary instrument of the human body, in territory that no evolutionary blueprint prepared it for. This is enough, more than enough. It is in fact one of the most remarkable things that the human species does. The night is very quiet now. The thinking mind has thought enough for one evening. The ancient body has carried the day and is ready. In the way it is always ready at this hour to rest, let the thoughts settle. Let the questions find their place at the edges of awareness, where they can remain without demanding answers. Let the breath deepen and slow. Let the heart, that 2 billion times repeated fact of living, continue its quiet work. The body knows how to rest. It has known how to rest for as long as there have been bodies. The specific biochemistry of sleep, the release of adenosine's pressure, the restoration of synaptic strength, the consolidation of the day's memories, the cleaning of metabolic waste from the brain's tissues, all of this happens without instruction, without effort, without any decision from the conscious mind. It happens because the body is ancient and because rest is one of the things that ancient bodies know how to do. Let it happen now. The long human story continues in the dark, as it has always continued, in the breathing of a sleeping body, in the quiet beat of a heart that does not rest, even when the person rests, in the slow, patient work of cells doing their ancient work of maintenance and repair. The grasslands are gone. The small fires are cold ash, scattered across 10,000 centuries. The ancestors who lived there 40 years with their full, hard, brilliant bodies are dust so old it has dissolved into the geology of the continents. But their bodies are here, in you. Their adaptations are your adaptations. Their ancient wisdom written into the biology you carry is working in you right now, in the dark, in the quiet, in the rest that the ancient body always finds its way back to. This is very old. This is the oldest comfort there is. Sleep now. The body knows it has always known, and knowing it rests. And in the resting, the long human story continues, as it will continue for as long as there are ancient bodies willing to carry it forward into the morning. Sleep.